So imagine a 6, 7-year-old child at the holidays. Grandparents are coming, aunts and uncles are coming over. They come to the door. They live out of town. They've just traveled a distance, and they walk in, and your child says, "When are you going home?" As a kid, I would say that, and my parents would tease me and laugh about it. And I imagine they assumed I didn't want them there. Like, why are you here? When are you going home? It's easy to make that assumption with kids. And yet, when I had my own child, my firstborn, and he was young and it was Christmas time, and he would say, "Are there any more presents for me?" And I remember explaining this to my mother, that it was his personality style. He's very logical. He's very focused on, thinking through things rather than feeling. And he just wanted to know, like, he's the kind of kid who sorts the presents. These presents are for Harrison. These presents are for Abby. These are for Mom. These are for Lexi. And so he wants to know. And so I remember explaining that to my mom, is that he's not being greedy. He just has the need to know. And he can move on. Like, no, there's no more gifts for you. He's not going to throw a tantrum. He's just going to be like, okay, now I know. So as I explained this to my mom, I started to realize that this was probably, and I'm almost certain, this was where I was at as a kid. I loved company and family coming. I remember enjoying that very much. And so I can imagine the reason I asked that question is because I wanted to know. I wanted to know how much time I had with them. I wanted to know when they were leaving to mentally prepare myself, because I'm more of a feelings person, even though I was asking these logical questions. And so now I look at it and say, I just wanted to know. And as a child, the way I phrased it, adults misunderstood it. And that's something to keep in mind with our kids when they ask questions and when they make statements, that it's easy to assume where they're coming from, that they're being greedy or they're being rude or whatever label behavior we're putting on them.
Well, hello. This is Don.
And Gina.
With Focused Healthy Family. This is podcast number 32. And we're talking today about generational expectations. And we're coming from 2 different locations. We'll talk about that in a minute. But before we get into it, let's hear a word from our sponsor.
Hi guys, it's Gina. I have struggled with depression for most of my adult life. I've been treated for clinical depression for the past 7 years, and yet I've still struggled with low energy, low ambition, and just struggling to move forward. I'll wake up after 8 or 9 hours of sleep and still feel tired. I know the things that I need to do to improve my health, yet I haven't had the energy to do those things. Well, then I learned about Magic Mind and their 30-day challenge that they offer. So after some investigation, I decided to take the challenge. And after taking it for a week or 2, I found that I was waking up feeling more rested. I wasn't craving the morning caffeine that I would typically drink in the morning to get me going. I was beginning to make choices like going outside to walk, which was helping me feel better and continued to help motivate me to do more of the things that I wanted to do. I don't take anything without first reading the ingredients and learning more about the product. Magic Mind is a 2-ounce drink and contains matcha, which is green tea extract. And we know that green tea contains L-theanine, which helps to reduce anxiety and stress. It's also been shown to increase focus and can boost immunity. The other ingredients in Magic Mind are adaptogens, nootropics, and honey. Forbes calls Magic Mind Silicon Valley's new morning elixir. If you'd like to try it, please go to www.magicmind.co/focusedhealthy. Our listeners can get 20% off your first order. Just use the code FOCUSEDHEALTHY20. You can also get 40% off your first subscription purchase. I want to invite you to take the challenge. Try Magic Mind, do more, and stress less.
And we're back. And again, we're talking about generational expectations and what that means for the holidays.
And I'm live from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
And I'm back at the studios of Focused Healthy Family in Charlotte, North Carolina. So you'll hear a little bit of background noise, probably coming from the beach, from all
Yes.
kinds of different things.
We hope to start a YouTube channel. And so we record these over Zoom at the same time we're sharing just the audio on our podcast. So if you hear noises, there's some working sounds going on. The ocean is back there. I have my earbuds on to focus the sound more so I can hear. And a neighbor was talking on her balcony.
Yeah.
Who knows what she'll hear. And so, thinking about holidays, thinking about vacation, thinking about traveling, different locations, it's very fitting to do a holiday podcast. Yes, Don, it's your turn.
We're having to learn how to deal with two different areas. But I was just listening to your story. I remember you've told that before to me. I know. I was thinking about the fact that I was really the opposite of that. When we had company coming over at Christmas time, it was like, oh no, hide the toys, hide the new stuff. Don't let them know where it's at. Because we had experiences. I had some cousins that were pretty wild. And I had experiences in the past where they came and they played with my toys and they broke them. And so I didn't like them coming. I didn't want to have company. I was I was really the opposite. So I would hide the most important toys. Mom wouldn't let me hide them all. So we had to have something to play with. But the most important ones I'd put up in the closet and close the door and lock it.
So your mom let you do that? She was involved in that process of hiding toys?
Well, I guess after Mom was, I don't think Mom really enjoyed relatives coming over either. I think Dad loved it. Dad wanted it. He would have had people over there all the time. Mom didn't though. Yeah, at least that she once she got into it, she was fine.
And not that she didn't enjoy it. She's probably more of an introvert and your father's more of an extrovert.
Yeah.
So she enjoyed seeing everybody, but it was also overwhelming. So maybe she understood when your toy got broken, how overwhelming that was. And so she could appreciate your feelings with it. And, as much, I'm an introvert too. And depending on the degree of introversion, how much energy it takes for you to be around a group of people. So an extrovert gains energy from being around a large group of people and talking. It energizes them. They feel on top of the world. An introvert gets depleted from that kind of interaction. I call myself a social introvert. A social introvert, I thrive on one-to-one interaction with people. That really pumps me up and drives me. Although I do need time to myself to really fully recharge. A group situation, and I have times when I really like group situations, it's exhausting to me. Trying to figure out when to speak up, when to insert something in the conversation takes a whole lot of effort. So just speaking to that one criteria, and that's a factor.
Well, in thinking about that, in talking about expectations, which we're going to define here in a minute, but it then helps for parents to think about beforehand how that child responds to people coming over, and what can you do to set that child up for a good experience. And somebody that's introverted and the crowds tend to cause them issues, you might want to do it slowly, somehow get them, maybe ask your relatives to come, more one at a time, or one family come and then another one, break it up a little bit later. Might be an idea for you that helps those that have trouble with that to be able to handle it better.
Don and I are hand signaling each other for those who can't see this and are just listening. So
Well,
we talk over each other.
Sunshine is over here playing with the little ball in the circle thing. And so I'm hearing that going off in the background. She's having a blast with it. Sorry, that's our cat down here in the studio.
And I can't hear that. noise. So that's good for me. I'm sure it's going to show up on the speaker, on the whatever, your end of things. So you were talking about hiding toys and putting toys away. So one of our children, or maybe more than one, I'm pretty sure our youngest, we would do the same thing, that they didn't want to share toys. Do you remember this? It could have been
somewhat.
Harrison.
Yeah.
Did Harrison do that too?
Yeah, I think he did somewhat. Again, I don't think they were as like I was, like panicking and, but they
Our
were.
youngest
Yeah.
panicking. Just birthday parties were overwhelming to her. We rarely had, her first birthday party was an adult friend of mine, her older sister's friend. She wasn't one to hang out with little kids when she was a little kid, and their energy overwhelmed her. And we had very small little birthday parties when we did. And even then, yes, she got very overwhelmed by it and them touching her things. And
Yeah.
it was quite an experience, right? And so, thinking about when my parents would come to birthday parties, they used to come to the kids' birthday parties because when they moved closer, they're only 40 minutes away. So they would be there. And, if your parents are coming, if the grandparents are at the party or holiday events, what are their expectations there? I hear this from friends all the time. And they want this to happen. They want the kid to pay attention to them, and they want this. And so they often will say, well, we'll have a family party and a friends party, because in-laws can get very particular about their grandkids and insisting they spend time with them.
Well, let's, how about we define what we're talking about with generation expectations first before we get too much further into, so they kind of understand what we're talking about.
And this is sort of a precursor to the new program that Don and I are putting together called Sandwich Generation, Parenting Our Children, Our Parents, and Ourselves. So there's many of us, my age, Don's age, big group of people who are still raising children either at home or even just supporting them financially or emotionally, as well as having aging parents who now, need us for different levels of support and care. So we are sandwiched in the middle of juggling both of those roles. Part of it came about as people are living longer. People delayed having children. That was another factor. And really just anyone who's kind of in the middle juggling two different aspects of things. And so you want to define the different generations, Don, as they become labeled and known.
Well, the ones that are, I think, most common, let's put it that way, are, of course, the Great Generation was the
generation,
World War II kind of era parents.
Born in the early 1900s.
The Boomers, which is kind of where I fall into place.
Boomers typically.
I'm sorry.
I was going to define each as we go.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Boomers is
typically people born between around 1946 and 1964. So as we speak, those are people in their late 50s into the 70s.
Then comes Generation X.
Yes,
okay.
That's where I am. People born typically around 1965 through 1980. So people in their 40s and 50s.
And then we jump into the millennials. Is that correct?
Yes, and those are those born from around 1981 through 1996. So these are your 20 and 30-year-olds right now.
And then finally, I say finally, there are some other ones out there, but Generation Z.
So Generation Z is typically seen as those from 1997 forward. And I mean, that's 25 years. So like our oldest was born in 1997. And so every generation is about, what, a 25-year period? No, a 15-year period, really. So there's really, there's more generations being labeled. And there's, if you look these up, there's things in between, in between the Generation X and the millennials. It's often called Generation Y, or the Zennials is what I found. There's so many different names and different classifications and categories, but it helps to just understand. So boomers are generally people born after World War II ended. People got married and had their kids. And so there was a boom in the population because pretty much men came home from the war and babies were born, right?
We won't go into why that was, but that was,
I think that's obvious, Don.
yes, yes.
And then the children of the boomers are the Generation X, right? And typically the children of Generation X are the millennials, but not really, depending.
Yeah.
We our children are Generation Z. And that's part of people having children in later years and affecting things. So each generation is born into a different world.
Well, and the sandwich generation that we talk about really isn't necessarily like
One
an
of those,
age-related kind of thing. It was really talking about anybody that is kind of in that stuck place between raising children and taking care of aging parents.
And that can be, I have 70-year-old patients who still have living parents working in geriatric rehab, or I have geriatric patients in their 90s and their children who are taking care of them are really geriatric as well. They're in their 70s or late 60s. And so that adds a whole nother component. So there's lots of different ways to look at this, right? But when we talk about sandwich generation, you're generally in the middle of juggling. So it really can encompass a whole lot.
Kind of some like fun facts a little bit about the generation and how things are influenced as far as like with the holidays coming up and shopping and buying and all. I found some kind of statistics, I guess, on the web about these influences, like for instance, how social media influences these different generations during the holiday season. And you look at boomers, you're talking about 10% of social media really influences them. And you jump up to the Gen Z and you're talking about 50% are influenced by social media when it comes to their shopping habits, their Christmas buying habits. The social media is likely to influence my holiday shopping more this year than last year. And what's interesting there is now 47% of boomers. So where boomers are catching on to it and taking on to it, whereas 67% have increased their social media interactions with the holidays this year versus last year. So just a couple of interesting, I thought, how things have changed. One of the things you and I were talking about is changing or the transition when, as the family grows, the holidays change how they present. I remember, when I was growing up, my father was kind of the pull together for the family. He was the one that people kind of gathered. He brought us all together. And I remember when he passed, and he died in 1976, and I was 17. My brothers and sisters were all married. Not all, but most were married and started having
20s.
kids. Yeah, and it changed. Everything changed on that holiday. And I can remember how it affected me in the fact I felt it just felt very lonely, and it didn't have the holiday feeling anymore. And we still got together for Christmas, but it started to really change, especially as my brothers and sisters had their kids and I wasn't having kids yet. They would have their family time before they would have our. So it all changed and morphed. And I think we even see it now in our youngest going through some of the same stuff, feeling the changes and not liking them and wishing it would be different.
Don is 11 years older than his oldest brother. And he did not get married till he was 35 and did not have his first child till 38. So big age, there's a 12-year age gap between our oldest and the next cousin on Don's side of the family. So when Harrison came along, there hadn't been a baby in a while. Their kids were still
just starting to get some of them getting married, but not.
Well, yeah, because my youngest nephew on Don's side of the family is 1 year younger than me. So he got married right after we did. So none of them had kids yet. When Harrison came along, maybe one or two of them were married.
Yeah.
But no one else had kids yet. And most of them were in high school and younger, right? Joanna was 12 when Harrison was born, right? So they were still in school for the most part. And so he came along and it was exciting. Your brothers and sisters were excited. There's a new baby in the family. And there was just so much centering around him. I remember going there. We drove there. He was 6 weeks old because he was born November 10th. And that's the year we've told the story how we left Charlotte, North Carolina, drove to St. Louis so we could have Christmas Eve with your family because that's how they typically celebrated. You got together at Christmas Eve. And then Christmas Day, we did the Chinese restaurant meal and had Christmas the day after Christmas in Pennsylvania when my parents still lived there. But it was, I can still see it. I had this little red and white, like elf costume for him. It was a little baby onesie with a hat, and everybody wanted to hold him. And it was so exciting. And so Abby came along 4 years later. And by then, a bunch of your nieces and nephews, were married and they were starting to have kids. So by the time Lexi came along, 11 years after Harrison, your brothers and sisters were busy being grandparents.
Yeah.
And had their own kids, right? So traveling out there looked very different. Instead of it focusing around us, because we live far away, we have the baby, they were busy with their families. And so it definitely changed the dynamic. And so it made different dynamics, our oldest versus our youngest, and for us as well, going to visit the family.
Part of that is having to deal with the stress of that, because what a lot of people tend to do is they want to try to do it the way it was done before. They want to try to keep the traditions up and that can, some people do it, yet at the same time, a lot of people stress over it and fret over it and feel sad about it or depressed about it.
Well, having to juggle, we live far away from the family. When my parents were still in Pennsylvania, we had in-laws in St. Louis, Missouri, and in-laws in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So a long distance from us. So we had to juggle where we were going. And we used to alternate, one at Thanksgiving, one at Christmas. And yet there were times where we wanted to stay home. And so people who live closer to relatives, they have the juggling act of going to multiple places on the same day or figuring all that out. And part of the reason, things changed as our kids got older and your siblings were now grandparents, is that became their priority, is being with their grandkids, which makes sense, right? So that changed. No longer could we just all gather at your mom's Christmas Eve. And after she passed, that sort of evolved that, because there was no longer that location, your mom and her house, and getting there on Christmas Eve, despite everything else they had going on. And that happened early on, right? Harrison was 8 and Abby was 4. So they didn't yet really have many grandkids. Just, I guess, Ken had grandkids. And so juggling those things is part of how things change, and resentments can happen. Oh, why don't you come over anymore? And, I even remember with your family and the nieces and nephews, and when we get together, well, so-and-so's not coming because they have to go to their, your nieces and nephews now were married and they had to go to their in-laws' house. And so and we're coming all the way from North Carolina. And we're like, everyone should be there because we're traveling, 800 miles to come see you. Why aren't you here? Right. And yet they had their own families to deal with. And your brothers and sisters had their in-laws. And so there's just different layers, and different people have different expectations of what it should look like, and different disappointments. And we can hold on to grudges of, you didn't come, I traveled all that way and you didn't come. And we understood because
and what's interesting about it, in a way, it hasn't changed, because and thinking about it as we talk about this, I think about my mom and dad and how they tried to get together with their brother. This is after the fact. Most of the kids are grown, were grown, and even myself were gone, and they still would try to, not on Christmas Day or Christmas, but like somewhere around that time frame, either between Thanksgiving and Christmas or just after Christmas, they would still try to get together, the brothers and sisters, just not even necessarily the grandkids.
So your parents getting together with your aunts and uncles,
yeah,
right? Your parents' generation connecting with.
And I see that kind of as families evolve, that becomes part of it, because the parents don't get as involved as it goes on and on. The parents don't get as involved with the kids. They may go for a little bit for Christmas, but so they put their concentration back on let's get together with my brothers and sisters, and have some time with them, and you kind of reconnect a little bit.
Well, and it can look very different for different families. There are people who have kids, and when their kids grow up, they're not as involved. I've talked to friends who, when their parent or their in-law came, it disrupted their family, and they asked that person that they wanted a nuclear Christmas. They wanted it just to be mom, dad, and kids, and actually asked, a grandparent to not come, because when other expectations are going on, when the way we're raising children is very different than the way they raised us and the way they're treating our kids. And if we don't like what they're doing, sometimes we need to set boundaries. And that can be challenging, no matter if they live far away or if they live close.
Well, we even do that. I know we've invited your parents up for Christmas, but we've asked them to come in the afternoon or later in the afternoon so that we can have the morning with our own kids. Mm-hmm. Now it's going to be interesting as our own kids have started to move out, not having kids yet and not even getting married at this point. It's just going to be interesting to see how our own family traditions are going to evolve.
Yeah, if I could delve into that more, just speaking personally, my side of the family, we have gotten together with my sister, my brother's got kids, my parents, and us. We've alternated Thanksgiving or Christmas. So initially it was either Thanksgiving holiday or Christmas holiday. My parents lived on Lake Murray, so it was 2 hours south of us, in a big house, lots of bedrooms, lots of room for everyone. And so we would all gather there. My brother would come down from Pennsylvania. My sister would come from Raleigh. And we'd all be there. And then my brother got divorced. So then it became either Thanksgiving or the week after Christmas. So the kids would still be with mom because the kids were young when they got divorced. And so there was a shift there. And then it wasn't always every other year. But we started doing things from a young age. I know we did a Toys for Tots collection. And as we got together, we went shopping together to a store and had the kids pick out a toy for another kid. I remember that because explaining to, I think it was our youngest, that, you are not getting to keep this toy. This toy is going to another boy or girl. Because she picked out a fire truck. She was into fire trucks and picked out this fire truck that lit up and made noises. And I remember, kids, it's easy to focus on gifts and what do you want for Christmas? And let's go tell Santa what you want. And let's make a list that we can get them wrapped into this idea of give me, give me, give me. And leave out the giving of gifts to other people, leave out the sharing. And so this is a way that we were able to incorporate that. Before my brother got divorced, we actually spent one Christmas in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. And so my brother's kids and my older two are very close in age. And so my middle and his youngest were, I don't know, barely like preschool age. And there was an organization that collected, they did like an angel tree or something where you picked out a family and this child and something they specifically wanted for Christmas. And the organization with donations bought the gifts wrap them, and then the parents came and picked them up so they could get a gift from Santa. Parents couldn't afford it, something that that child really wanted. It. So we went, it was a couple of days before Christmas, we helped wrap and sort and different things. And so some of our kids were so young, I don't know how much they were helping, but they were part of it. And then when the kids got older, my sister with her dogs had therapy dogs and dogs that visited nursing homes. And so we did that at least once, where as a whole family, my parents, my brother and sister and I, our kids, went to a nursing home and with my sister's dogs, and we visited the people at the nursing home. And it's kind of a nice way to bring generations together. When my older two were little, we used to, with the homeschool group, go once a month to a local nursing home. It was actually an assisted living facility. And through the activities department, we did an activity with the residents there. It was a smaller facility, so we got to know the residents, they got to know the kids, and we would do a craft with them or play a game with them. And as someone who works in geriatrics, I know how much most of those people, that generation, appreciate being around kids. A lot of times they don't have family who lives close. Maybe some of them never had kids, but wish they had, were not able to. The people who didn't like being around kids didn't come to the activity. But being able to connect them, it's just such a beautiful thing. It's great for the kids to see these people, you know, as grandparents. Maybe their grandparents live far away, or maybe some kids don't have grandparents, they've passed on. And so it's like adopt a grandparent kind of idea. And so making that connection has just always been dear to my heart. And so I love that time that we went and visited the nursing home. Another thing we did crossing the generations was going to a animal shelter. So we had made some cat and dog toys ahead of time. And then we went to the shelter to deliver the items, and we got to walk around and visit the dogs. And just looking at these activities and how they cross the generations, right? It was an activity we were all doing together. So it kind of took us out of, it was a new thing that we were adding into it and doing a giving back.
Well,
and I just think.
No, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to stop you. Is there something else you want? How about we look at some ways of how to help the expectations, how to help change so that you can have better expectations. You know, one of the things I was thinking about was how they could do it differently. One is to talk with each other. You know, to be able to do kind of almost like problem solving in a way, but to be able to approach your family and say, you know, things are changing, and I want to keep the holidays in the best way we can, but we need to look at what we can do maybe differently, you know, this year and ongoing, and then allow each to be able to give their ideas without judgment, and then be able to figure out from there what would work.
I want to step it back one level and just talk about the challenges that you can have when you get together with families and when you're spanning different generations. So you might have parents that expect that Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner or whatever holiday you celebrate looks like this. You eat this food, you know, you have it at this time of day, on this occasion. You maybe have a formal table set, and this is what it looks like. And maybe the person you marry comes from a different background where it's a big buffet and there's food everywhere and it's Italian. Well,
no
it has a different
things here.
But just a different, you know, way of looking at it, right? And especially if you have grandparents who are used to formal settings, expecting young children to fit into formal settings and dressed up and wearing a nice dress and then not spilling on it and having manners at the table and waiting till everyone sits down to eat. And another short story, we went one year, my parents came up and we went, I think, to our church, Unity, to eat a meal. And it was around 3:00 and our son wasn't eating much. And I remember getting all kinds of advice from people. And I realized after the fact, this kid usually eats lunch around noon and dinner around 6. 3 o'clock, that's not when he eats a meal. So of course he didn't eat very much. He wasn't hungry. This was out of his schedule. Even now when we get together, he's like, it's not dinner time, this is when we eat dinner, this is when we eat lunch. And it's changed for him now that he works a job and has different hours. So there's so many different things that get put on young kids, but also us, we get triggered when we're around our family, our parents, our brothers and sisters, what we grew up with, right? It triggers our childhood memories, both good and the challenging things. And so how we interact and how we act. I remember, Don, years ago when we first had kids and we went to family, we kind of had, I think we got this from the counseling we did, as checking in with each other. Mm-hmm. And having kind of a word that was just between the two of us that meant we needed to check in, or that one of us was getting overwhelmed or needed, because both of us can get lost when we're with our, when you're with your siblings and your nieces and nephews, or when we're at my side, kind of get wrapped into that world, forget about the kids, or
well, you become that age again or something, kind of, in a way, you go back to when you were living at home and you were that child or whatever, you kind of get back somewhat into that mentality in a way.
Well, you could be triggered by different things, just like you talk about with tapping and the memories that come back. And so that can affect your behavior and how you're talking to your kids and how you're treating them. It's like, if you're a relaxed parent who lets your kids jump on the couch and do different things, well, then you go out in public or to someone else's house and it's like, oh, well, you can't behave like that here. We have to behave properly when we're here. And so we have all these different expectations and these ideas of, this is okay at home and this is not okay here. And so it's important, like you're talking about, to talk to kids for one, when we go to grandma's, and we also have to talk to grandma and say, okay, I know that this is what you expect. My kid is 2. And she's not going to sit at the table. And I know that's a challenge for you. And so these are tough conversations to have with the older generations, right? It's a conversation that you can initiate with your kids and become part of your family. And yet you can tell your young kids, this is how grandma likes things, yet they're a child. No matter what their age, even if they're a teenager, their brain is not fully developed and their processing is different than what ours looks like. And we've got to come to compromise and realize if they're acting like a kid, well, yes, of course they're acting like a kid. They are a kid. And I'm talking about even a 20-year-old here. They're not an adult. Their brain is not fully developed until late 20s. Some people it's even delayed, right? We're talking about our growth and being able to understand and empathize and rationalize. And so playing into those ideas of different expectations, and like you talk about, Don, is communicating ahead of time can be huge.
Well, there were a couple of things. One is, when we did the counseling, one of the things they talked about is for you and I to set our own expectations before we go. These are what and how do we work with that, and then relaying that and using that to help talk to the parents and grandparents and stuff about that too. And also to think about the idea, the grandparents live in a much different world than the family does too. A very quiet, maybe I'm not, it all varies, but they live in a quiet. So having family come in can be overwhelming, can be, they're not used to having kids running around or even other adults talking when they've lived in a quiet. So you have to kind of keep that in mind too, is how to best negotiate that, I guess, is what can we do, give grandma some quiet time, where we go do something else or we go outside, things like that. I think you got to think about, because I know even for ourselves, we've kind of gotten into not quite the empty house, but it's a lot quieter. And so when the dogs come and our kids come, can be overwhelming. At least I know for myself, it can be a little overwhelming. And so I have to be able to pull myself away for, Anyway,
And for me, I get all excited about it, which is interesting because you're really more of the extrovert and I'm more of the introvert. But for me, I like, yay, we're all here and the kids are arguing. Isn't this beautiful?
well, and I like that. Don't get me
But
wrong. I do
no, but
enjoy
there's
having
nothing wrong with that. But you've gotten used to quiet. And so, and
Sure.
realizing it, just because they're older doesn't mean they're the ones who get overwhelmed by quiet. Like,
Yeah,
screaming is
no,
really
it all
dirty.
varies. They might miss the noise, or so there's a lot of, so it's really talking through it and finding out what's going on for them, what kind of expectations they have, what kind of expectations you have for your family, and then working through it, talking through what it'll take to make it work.
And so you can start with your partner or your spouse having, like we're going home, we're driving 5 hours to my family. I really want to hang out with my friends one day. Our kids are little, they're not going to do well with grandma and grandpa. And so can you hang with them so I can hang out with my friends? If you have that expectation that the kids are going to be fine with grandparents and then they're not, and then there's meltdowns, or maybe you plan for that, but it helps to have a backup. Like, we've done that where we go out, me and the siblings and our spouses, and like tell my parents, let us know if someone's having an issue and if we need to come home, the kids are little. So you can start by communicating with your partner ahead of time. And then, like I talked about, communicating with your kids, but then also communicating with the other family members. And there's a nuance there. When we raise our own children and we have our own dynamic, it's our dynamic of our family. And it's very different stepping into communicating with a parent, someone who doesn't live at home, people of other generations. So that's something we're going to delve more into in our new program. So we're talking about expectations and looking at what other people's expectations are, looking at what our expectations are, making modifications. So as we're recording this, Don and I wanted to do a podcast. I came to the beach for 3 nights with our youngest daughter as partly a writing retreat. I've done this for myself before, but this time I brought my daughter with me. And so I had to release expectations of what it would look like for her. And I had to decide what was most important to me, being able to do some writing, to be able to work on a podcast with you. And so you had to be flexible with the time. And so I let her know that I wanted to do this. And I said, we could do this now or we could do this later. We did some problem solving and things. And so that's what we're talking about, with the holidays. And it really applies to all the times. But as with the holidays coming up, with getting together with different generations of people, of friends, other outside people that we don't see often, there's just a whole lot going on there. And we really need to stop and realize it looks differently for everybody. It looks different for our parents, our brother, our kids, each of our kids, their perspective is different. We really all are in different worlds. I've talked with my brothers and sisters, we're all in our 50s now, about childhood. And it's like each of us had very different childhoods. Where my sister and I are 3 years apart. My brother and I are less than 2.5 years apart. We grew up together in the same house. Our parents were married, yet our experiences were different because of our birth order, because of our personalities, all those things, right? And so thinking about people of different generations, they really are starting their life in very different worlds. So we need to keep this kind of in mind.
Well, my thought for this all is about communication. It's really about, we got to not be afraid to talk to each other about what's the holiday going to look like, and and I mean, it isn't just for the holiday. Really, communication should be through our whole year and all. But yet, it's important for us to talk to each other about what our expectations are.
Because if we don't talk ahead of time, we're going to wind up reacting.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to wind up talking about it, whether it's yelling, whether it's getting mad, whether it's holding on to resentments. So if we plan ahead, we can respond instead of react.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to just share, kind of summarize. We've covered so many different things. As we're talking about this topic, I'm realizing we could have a regular podcast just on expectations. There's so many different components of this that we're talking about. And that's why we're putting together a whole new program, looking at the sandwich generation and juggling these two roles. So what can we do as we're going into the holidays and we know, I got to go to my parents and I don't like the way they talk to my kid, what can I do? So first thing I mentioned, recognizing the different expectations of different people and recognizing different ages of kids, recognizing different people's personalities and their strengths and their weaknesses. And like you said, Don, planning in advance, talking about things ahead of time, making plans. Our youngest did better when we went to big group gatherings if we got there early before the whole crowd came so she could have warm-up time, because usually she'd be warmed up when it was time to go home. She's like, she was finally having fun. So if we could get there early and give her that warm-up time. Problem solving, sitting down ahead of time. It's a great opportunity with your kids for them to learn problem solving. Like, okay, look, we're going to grandparents and this is grandma's expectations. And I know this is not how we typically do things. How can we compromise here? What things can we do?
Yeah, you got to make sure too, to do this without judgment. Let them go through what each of their expectations are, no matter how bizarre they might be. I want to have all my gifts at one time, or we say, okay, that's one idea. Let's keep going, and then you go back and look at them. So it's without judgment,
and realizing there's going to be compromise involved, and realizing it can look differently for different kids. Somewhere in the years, our daughter came up with the idea that we hung our Christmas stockings on Christmas Eve, and she latched onto that as a tradition. And I think it just happened by accident one year. And I was very stubborn but I want the Christmas stockings up for the whole month. I like looking at our Christmas stockings. And she's like, but it's our tradition. And I'm like, how did this become our tradition? And I realized I had to let go of that. This meant that much to her, right? I had to let go of it. And so we got to prioritize what is most important. We find out from our kids what's important to them. If you can have the conversation with your parents or siblings or whoever you're getting together with, what is it you really want to be able to do? What's most important? What can we let go of? Because if we have the expectation that we're going to see everybody and do everything, we're going to get disappointed, frustrated. There's going to be meltdowns and tantrums and chaos.
Even for the parents, what aunt you're going to see, what place you're going to go to, what event you're going to, all of that. You have to think about what's most important and what can I take out of that so I don't have so much pressure to get it all done.
Yeah, for years when we'd go to Pennsylvania, I had college friends and I slowly lost touch with them, with our kids getting overwhelmed with other people with their anxiety disorders. And it bothered me that I didn't be in touch with them. But guess what? 30 years after graduating, I reconnected with them. And it's like we've been friends all along. And so setting those priorities, looking at what traditions are most important, what is most important to different people, what things do we want to honor? What things can we let go of? Maybe we're just letting go of it for now, but it doesn't mean we're letting go of it forever. And then finally, creating new traditions. As you're blending families, maybe gotten remarried, have different situations as kids are getting older. What new traditions can you start? How can you kick things off differently? Our youngest complains because she's so much younger than her siblings. There's 11 years between her and her brother, and then there's 7 years between her and her sister. And my brother's kids are literally 1 year older than my middle child and 1 year younger. And so long gone are the days where we get together for an entire week on the lake at my parents' and we could hang out together. His kids could miss school a couple days to come to Pennsylvania. Things changed as they got into high school. Now they're in college in California. So just getting out here to this coast is hard. And then we maybe get 2 days with them. And so how can we add new traditions? How can we make this fun for everyone? So we're doing a murder mystery dinner party theater this year. So we're going to see what that looks like. So what new traditions, what new things can you do? How can you evolve things as things are evolving with your kids?
Well, we want to make memories and not enemies.
Yeah. People, there's that old, the holidays and people begrudging and getting together with family and it's ugly and I hate it. And, and why is it that you hate it? What happened that led you to that? And how can you change that?
That's our podcast for today. We hope you've enjoyed it. We would love to hear from you. Make sure to leave us a comment. If you like what you heard today, you can learn about our parent coaching program or join us for our next workshop. You can simply go to www.focusedhealthyfamily.com. There you'll find also our blog and our podcast links to those. You can join us on Instagram. Gina does that. It's Gina at Focused Healthy Family.
And remember, not only how you speak to your kids, but how you speak to other people, especially when they're listening and even when they're not. It shapes their future and it shapes your future too.